start today, I'm going to read a poem. It's called Welcome to Holland. It's by a woman named Emily Pearl Kingsley, and it was written about 25 years ago. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make your wonderful plans. The Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The stewardess comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean, Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plans. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would never have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around, and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, "Yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned." And the pain of that will never, ever, ever, ever go away, because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. I'm one of the lucky ones. I was raised in a strong pro-life family, and I've always considered myself pro-life. A while back, maybe even before I was married, I remember thinking that, God willing, I'd have a big family, and that when I was in my 40s, I'd probably have a child with Down syndrome. I didn't think of it as a good thing or a bad thing, just that's what happens. What I didn't expect was to have a child with Down syndrome when I was 30. We didn't know Julia had Down syndrome before she was born, and the news definitely took me by surprise. We were fortunate. The attending physician spoke to us in a very gentle and non-threatening manner. Simply said, "We've noticed some features consistent with Down syndrome." My initial reaction was to think, "She doesn't have Down syndrome, you have Down syndrome." But then my husband turned to me and said he'd noticed those features as well. When they brought Julia back to me, I took one look at her and pretty much said, "Yeah, she totally has Down syndrome." Even though it took almost a month to get the chromosome analysis results back in, everyone was pretty much operating under the assumption that she had Down syndrome from that moment on. Statistics show that an overwhelming number of women who receive a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, upwards of 90%, choose abortion. I can't even comprehend those figures. Down syndrome advocacy organizations like the Mass Down Syndrome Congress are working to ensure that women are given accurate, up-to-date information with the diagnosis, and that doctors are trained to deliver the information in a neutral manner. But for many families, the medical community has served only to deepen their fear, hurt, and confusion by attempting to schedule abortions after a prenatal diagnosis has been made, or by warning of looming disaster should the child be born. As I said, we were very fortunate. The doctor on duty did not present this as a bleak situation or one that we should have remedied sooner. And I've heard horror stories, as I said, stories of doctors attempting to schedule abortions, or even telling a woman who's just giving a birth to a child with Down syndrome that she should have had an abortion, because having a child with Down syndrome would put such a strain on her marriage that she'd end up divorced. Everyone in the hospital in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where Julia was born, was very kind and supportive. Nobody told me how to feel. They simply asked how I was doing and what I needed. They brought books and pamphlets explaining Down syndrome and telling me about the local supports that were available to me. When they would examine Julia, they would declare that she was the most beautiful baby in the hospital. One of the doctors on rotation had a friend with an adult daughter who had Down syndrome. The doctor offered to put me in contact with her friend. I figured we'd chat on the phone sometime after I went home. The next thing I knew, her friend and her friend's daughter were in my hospital room with gifts for Julia and me. Sorry, I thought it was going to be in the room. So that's the very earliest photo we have of Julia. I thought very early had just a little bit of spotting. They wanted to make sure everything was okay. We were very excited to hear her heartbeat that day. So this is right after Julia was born in the hospital. And that's Julia with her sister and me. And that's my father-in-law, John Ricketts. Reactions from family and friends were mixed. Some were quick to tell me what a blessing I'd received. Others apologized. A few simply didn't respond to emails or texts. None of those was particularly helpful. Julia is a tremendous blessing, and I wouldn't change a thing about her. The timing is everything. When I first received Julia's diagnosis, my head was spinning. I was tired. I was confused. I'd been caught completely off guard. I didn't need people telling me how to feel. I needed people to tell me that they were there for me, to support me through this journey. One of the books they gave me at the hospital was titled Babies with Down Syndrome, and the cover featured, not surprisingly, a little boy with Down syndrome. I couldn't look at that little boy for the first month. It's not because I found him offensive, or I thought he shouldn't have been born. I just needed time. Now I wouldn't bat an eye at that book. In fact, I'd probably pick it up and fuss over how cute he is. But it just takes time. Not long after Julia was born, we became acquainted with an organization called Reese's Rainbow, which helps families in the U.S. adopt children with Down syndrome and other special needs from overseas, children who would otherwise be left to languish in foreign mental institutions. I wept as I scrolled through the pictures of all the sweet babies waiting for a family, and I was struck by the Reese's Rainbow motto, because every family deserves the blessing of a child with Down syndrome. By then, I agreed. But my husband didn't. Not yet. He does now, but it takes time. Because the statistics surrounding Down syndrome and abortion are so horrific, I'm often reluctant to discuss the struggles associated with raising a child with Down syndrome. I'm afraid that if I say that it's hard, people will look at those 90% figures and conclude that those women made the right decision. I have always been pro-life, and we would have never considered an abortion if we'd known about Julia's Down syndrome prenatally. But the truth is, sometimes it's hard. It doesn't mean Julia isn't a blessing or that she's a lesser human being. She's just a kid who comes with some extra work. Having other people recognize those struggles would be enormously helpful. Sometimes folks, however well-intentioned, are quick to paint a picture of Julia, a stereotype really. Oh, those Downs kids, they're just angels. They're so loving. It's true, Julia does have a unique capacity for love, and it is her primary means of engaging with other people. But it's also true that at 2 years and 2 months, she still gets virtually all of her nutrition from a bottle and can barely eat pureed baby food off of a spoon. One time after a particularly difficult feeding session, my father remarked, "I thought these children were supposed to be so loving." Julia is incredibly loving, but she's still a toddler, and many things are harder for her than for the typical child. We make frequent visits to Children's Hospital, where Julia has many specialty medical appointments to check her various issues. Her heart, she has a congenital heart defect, as do many children with Down syndrome. Her eyes, they cross and her tear ducts were clogged. Her ears, she has fluid in her middle ear and some hearing loss. Her tummy, she projectile vomits milk and soy products. Her brain, she used to have unusual head movements upon waking and then an involuntary head bobble. Her thyroid, many children with Down syndrome have thyroid problems. Her speech is delayed due to cognitive delays, low muscle tone, and hearing loss. Her feet and legs, she wears orthotics on her feet to give her extra support for walking, and on and on. And we're so blessed to have so many fantastic medical resources at our disposal, and all of Julia's doctors have been great. At a recent cardiology appointment, after declaring that Julia does not require heart surgery at this time, Her doctor made a point of saying, "She's really cute." But it can still be hard. Taking 2 kids to the Longwood medical area, then waiting 2 hours because the ophthalmologist is running behind schedule, then driving home in rush hour traffic with a screaming baby who's upset because she got her eyes dilated. That's stressful. It would mean so much to families in these situations to have people recognize that these stressors exist. A call or a visit, even a meal every now and again, would do so much to rejuvenate tired and weary parents. And we have so many wonderful life-affirming people here in the pro-life movement that I sometimes have to remind people to make a fuss over our other daughter, Anna. She is a great big sister and recently said to me, "If I have a baby with Down syndrome in my tummy, I'm going to say yes." The Down Syndrome Advocacy Organization here in Massachusetts, the Mass Down Syndrome Congress, does a great job supporting families, educating professionals, and empowering individuals with Down syndrome. They have worked tirelessly to show the many things that people with Down syndrome can do. That's great, and I'm glad that Julia will have more opportunities than she would have even just 20 years ago. This time last year, Governor Patrick signed into law an act relative to Down syndrome genetic test results, which requires providers in Massachusetts to offer accurate and culturally sensitive information when delivering a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome. Expecting parents are connected with current parents of children with Down syndrome. This is due in large part to the efforts of the Mass Down Syndrome Congress. They fall short, however, by not taking a stand in the abortion debate. They are staunch advocates for people with Down syndrome, but not for the unborn. With the development of new non-invasive prenatal tests for Down syndrome, those staggering statistics, which indicate that 90% of women opt for abortion when given a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, could rise even higher. This is an area where the pro-life movement could be a tremendous asset by recognizing not simply the potential of individuals with disabilities, but their inherent worth, regardless of ability. At the end of the day, Julia's worth comes from not what she can do, but because, as Dr. Seuss wrote, a person's a person, no matter how small.